I'm going to be moving soon and have quite a few books, so I built a bookcase that can store and easily move all of my books. I made the bookcase out of a single 4x8 sheet of 11.5mm Baltic birch plywood, plus some MDF for the backs. I bought the plywood pre-cut into 2-foot by 4-foot sections so that I could fit it in my car. I designed the bookcase halves to be 2 feet wide, so cutting out the shelves was really simple with a circular saw and makeshift fence. I made the shelves 10 inches deep, which is large enough to accommodate my biggest books without them overhanging the edge of the shelf. The first couple of shelves didn't come out so well, and I was lucky to have just enough room on the sheet of plywood for 2 extra shelves. Next, I used a relatively straight 2x4 as a fence to rip the side pieces of the bookcase. These are as wide as the shelves are deep and are tall enough to accommodate shelves of 3 different heights. I then set my circular saw to cut half the thickness of the plywood so that I could cut slots for the shelves. At first, I used a speed square to define the edges of the slots, but eventually got comfortable enough to get really good results just cutting freehand. Then I used a chisel and a file to clean out the slots and get a really nice fit with the shelves. Then I could glue up the basic form of the bookcase. I used the unglued side of the bookcase on the ground to line everything up and then sort of slid everything into and away from my dresser to get it all nice and square. Once it was aligned, I pinned in the shelves with finish nails. And of course, I sunk the heads under the surface with my nail set. Then I could flip the piece over and attach the other side. Here you can start to see the differing heights of shelves, increasing from top to bottom. I made the top shelf the smallest to hold some of my small novels and paperbacks. On the bottom of the bookcase is the tallest shelf to hold my textbooks, university notebooks, and some big coffee table style books. After that, I glued up the second half of the bookcase in exactly the same way. Then I used my jigsaw to cut handles in the bookcases to make it easier to move around. It's hard to get any sort of smooth cut with a jigsaw, so I finished out the shapes with a file and then cleaned everything up with 80 grit up to 150 grit sandpaper. Before finishing, I also sanded the entire bookcase up to 150 grit. Then I gave everything 3 coats of Minwax satin spray-on polyurethane. For the back of the bookcase, I used 1/8 inch MDF pre-painted white on one side. I could have used more plywood here, but being the back of the bookcase, MDF was a good way to cut down on the piece's overall cost and weight. I used a bit of weld bond and finish nails to attach the backs to the bookcase halves. I find weld bond works really well at holding together dissimilar materials, like painted MDF and plywood, where wood glue normally wouldn't work. I really like how the painted MDF added to the overall clean look of the piece. This bookcase is meant to be mobile, so I added 4 caster wheels to the bottom of each half. Casters are pretty expensive, especially when you're buying 8. So to cut down on cost and moving parts, I only made the front 4 casters locking. These are the 4 that are exposed when the bookcase is open. I used little 1/2-inch screws to attach the casters so that screw tips wouldn't be poking out to the bottom shelf. Same story for the other half. When installing the hinges, I put the bookcase on its side to get the hinges in their general position and hold them roughly in place with a few screws. Then I stood the bookcase upright to tighten down the screws with gravity acting on the piece in the orientation in which it will be used. I used the same strategy to get everything aligned and tightened down for the suitcase latches. This way, the wheels are as flat on the floor as possible when everything is hinged and clasped. The latch screws protruded through the plywood a bit, so I just ground down these ends with my rotary tool. I bought these cheap gear tie-up straps to hold the book securely while the bookcase is in its mobile configuration. I stapled the straps to the hinged side of the case, that is, the side that will be contacting the ground if the bookcase is laid on its side. This way, the straps pull all of the books towards the ground in nice little piles when the bookcase is laying on its side. You can kind of see how that will work here when I'm test fitting the books to cut the straps to length. Then I resealed the cut ends of the straps with my blowtorch. Finally, the most exciting part, loading my books into the finished piece. Here it is in its first semi-permanent location, at least for a few months. The bookcase is wheeled into place, opened up, casters locked, straps undone, and it's all ready to use. I made this as part of the Rockler Plywood Challenge put on by the guys at the Modern Maker podcast. Make sure to check them out. It's a great show.